Juan Brown and I just shot BSWorks episode 5, where we talked about flat spins and twins, particularly about that crash of the Baron in Massachusetts in the middle of January. One of the folks who watched that video asked me a question in the comments about didn't a P38 crash like that? And the old memory light went on, and yeah, it's true. So stick with me as we look at that story of the P38 crash. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire we're going to talk about the crash of P38 November 7973 on June 6, 1997 at Tillamook, Oregon. This was a tragedy in so many ways. The Tillamook Naval Air Station Museum had just finished restoring this airplane about 6 months prior after a 20-year restoration process. And Ethel's father flew the P-38 in the Mediterranean theater in World War II, and he was credited with 4 kills and 1 probable. Ethel himself was a prolific writer about aviation, about warbirds in particular, and was involved in 2 TV series, the Smithsonian's Frontiers of Flight and the First Flights, which was hosted by Neil Armstrong. They may be floating out there on YouTube someplace. Reportedly, Ethel had flown over 215 different types of airplanes, most of those in warbirds. Before I get into the details of this particular crash, I think you need to know some background on the P-38. I was lucky enough to have flown the Fagan's P-38, rough stuff, and also a Scat-3 when they changed the livery. It is a lovely airplane and just a hoot to fly, but it is a very complex airplane to operate. The Fagan Lightning had 44-gallon reserve tanks, 72-gallon main tanks, and 55-gallon leading edge tanks, just the way it was in the war. This particular airplane that crashed didn't have that. But you're supposed to start taxi and takeoff on the reserve tanks, and after about 15 minutes, switch to the wing tanks, then to the main tanks, so your reserve is always your reserve. Because the pressure carburetor doesn't send all the fuel to the engine, and all the return fuel goes back to the reserve tank. And that's why you do it this way, so you burn at least 15 minutes so you have space for the fuel to go back to, rather than puking it overboard. One of the Echo cruise power settings results in about 42 gallons per hour fuel flow. Otherwise, it's upwards of 60 or more, essentially per engine. Essentially, you have about 44 minutes of fuel in the reserve tank. Okay, this is a critical thing. Frankly, it is a very complex fuel system, and it's hard to keep track of if you're not up on top of it, because it'll get you. Now let's look at low-speed operation. There isn't such a thing as a VMC speed for twins in World War II, but the World War II pilot training manual had a procedure to train for it. Instead, the relevant speed is called the VSSE, or safe. They didn't have V-speeds either, but they called it the safe single-engine airspeed. This is the minimum speed where you have control authority to overcome the prop torque and the P factor that's going to roll you over. Okay, the VMC roll, or departure is probably more accurate. If you have an engine failure below the safe single engine speed of 120 miles an hour, the book solution is to pull both throttles to idle and land straight ahead. If you're on takeoff and you run out of runway, you put it down, but I'm going to run out of runway, so you raise the gear. That's what the book says, raise the gear. If you're above 120 miles an hour, the gear is started up, reduce power enough to regain control, and reapply slowly, adding rudder is necessary. That's the book answer for engine failure. There aren't any 2-seat P-38s. Your first flight is a solo. I did the preparation and the recommendation ride in a B-25, and then I did the instrument portion of the check ride, because I have an ATP, in a Baron. And then finally I did the check ride in the P-38, and it was my first ride. So once all that was done, and I had flown the airplane enough to become comfortable with it, I wanted to see what this safe single engine speed VMC thing was all about. So using that demo simulated engine failure on takeoff profile from the pilot training manual, remember there is one, it's not in the Dash 1. I took the airplane up to about 9,000 feet and set the left engine to 0 thrust, which is about 15 inches, 1,500 RPM. And then I added power to the right engine. Once I got up about 35, 37 inches or so, I'd run out of flight control authority, and that airplane performed a really fast roll during which time I was ripping the throttles to idle and unloading to 0G. Okay, it was eye-opening. I used coordinated rudder and aileron, then I rolled back upright and pulled out of the dive. As I said, it was eye-opening. Frankly, it engraved speed control into my brain. If there was any doubt, speed is life. Okay, and I'm a believer. Now let's look at the Ethel crash. Jeff Ethel had taken the P38 on a short photo mission earlier that day, flying for about 20 minutes or so. And on the accident flight, Ethel flew with another P38, and they were making passes in formation by the airport. Apparently they were preparing for a P38 get-together just to happen either that day or next one. Witnesses reported they were airborne for about 20-25 minutes, and then after the crash, the investigators discovered both fuel selectors were on reserve. Remember, I said there's about 44 minutes of fuel in the reserve tanks. One of the engines quit due to fuel starvation, and the probable cause was determined to be failure of the pilot to maintain VMC, safe single-engine speed in this case, which resulted in loss of control and collision with the terrain. Okay? It doesn't tell me much. Tell me what happened. I think that's a pretty simplistic view, and frankly doesn't tell the whole story and doesn't do us much good to learn what boundaries we have to set, so it doesn't happen to us. Witness observations actually add a huge value to this final report and are relevant to the discussion that Juan Brown and I had in BSWorks 5 about what's going on with a twin-engine airplane in a spin. It's pretty serious business. One witness, who was 1 mile north, reported seeing the P-38 in gentle circles going towards the ground, and he saw at least 4 revolutions. He also said that he had the impression the aircraft was in a flat spin along with the slow revolution. There was another witness 1 mile south who stated that it was going very slow, like it was gliding, and then it started slowly flipping out of control. Not end over end, but it went more sideways and rolling over slowly. And then there was yet another witness about 1 mile, about a half mile west, who said it maintained an easterly level flight pattern for approximately 4 seconds, then began a series of 2 to 3 clockwise flat, wobbly, downward spins. Beginning to sound like departure. An aircraft mechanic was driving south approximately 1 mile north of the accident site and reported the Silver Lightning was in a slow turn in my direction, and I thought its airspeed was a little slow, and the aircraft went into a flat spin. 10 seconds or more or less went by between level flight, the flat spin, and the crash. Okay, that's pretty good stuff. The pilot's father was on the field, and he witnessed the departure as well. He reported seeing the aircraft 3 to 4 miles from the end of the runway, about 300 to 400 feet in the air, and it seemed to him that it was much slower than what the normal approach speed should be. He also saw the left wing drop pretty quick, and the pilot immediately raised the left wing to level flight. Some 2 to 3 seconds after that, the airplane made a slight right turn and then started down. Rough thing to see. Private pilot flying into the traffic pattern there at Tillamook in a Cessna 172 reported that he was descending through 1,500 feet to enter the pattern and noticed a P-38 a few miles to the left of them heading south. He observed the aircraft transition from a descent into a climb combined with what appeared to be a hard bank to the right, okay, and a nearly 180-degree heading change. Then it appeared to regain level attitude and proceeded immediately into a spin. I think that what he was seeing from his perspective, it didn't maintain regular flight. It was already departed. He also stated the P-38 might have spun 4 to 5 times in a slight nose-down attitude before it disappeared from sight, with little or no perceptible horizontal speed. Pretty accurate description, and virtually all of these witnesses, what they're describing is plainly a spin, and pretty much a flat spin. The FAA inspector that examined the wreckage reported that the airplane came to rest upright with no lateral or longitudinal slide marks. Then the nose was oriented towards the east. It was on an east-west bearing and the nose to the east. The right and left reserve and main gas caps were intact and secured in the filler neck. They had not popped out. The fuel selectors, he photographed those in the reserve position. They were both in reserve. The right propeller had separated from the aircraft. One blade was impaled vertically in the ground, and the remaining blades displayed minimal deformation or scratching. Okay, it had stopped. The right engine had stopped. The left propeller, on the other hand, was also, the propeller itself was also separated from the engine with one blade impaled in the ground, and the two remaining blades were still attached to the hub, and one blade displayed extensive twisting and bending deformation. Okay, what that shows us is it was under power. That left engine was under power when it hit. The left engine. All of this is consistent with those witness observations. Okay, it hit in a flat attitude. It didn't have any forward momentum. The right engine had failed, and it turned out due to fuel starvation. The left engine was producing power. The airspeed was very slow, and when it reduced below 120 miles an hour, the airplane departed controlled flight. There was a small fire, but the pilot, portions of the seat, the restraint system, the parachute, and the aircraft canopy were found a short distance south and east of the main wreckage. It's a clamshell canopy that goes over the top and then roll-up windows on the sides. I think the top end is what they're talking about. Departing the aircraft at or below 500 feet in any airplane is unrecoverable. It just is. We're not talking about airshow accident extra 300 here. This is a heavy twin-engine piston airplane, and a departure at any altitude, frankly, in a twin, is not conducive to survival. You got to pay attention to speeds. There just isn't any wiggle room here. And frankly, a lack of system knowledge can kill you. But the story isn't over here. Logbooks are a legal record, and in November of '96, this airplane was assigned a new registration of November 7973 and received a standard airworthiness certificate as a P38L in the limited category. The airplane had apparently completed restoration by 8 January '97, 2 new engines, other stuff like that, and received an annual inspection at that point. But that log entry was not signed, and that's a pretty critical thing. It's unknown how many hours it had flown between that point and the accident. The maintenance log shows that in May of '97, new radios were installed, the weight and CG were revised, and an engine test run was accomplished. But it did not show the aircraft total weight and the updated CG, so it was an incomplete logbook entry. But it was signed. The final logbook entry was for another annual on 2 June '97, listing a total, go back on that before, but it listed a total of 5 hours since the restorations. Estimates of flying before the 6 June accident put another total of 1.4 hours on the airplane, and then a strict review of that record would say that the airplane was not legal to fly due to incomplete logbook entries. Sloppy maintenance records are a problem, okay? Speaking of problems, technically, the pilot wasn't qualified to fly this P38 either. The only pilot logs available stopped in November of '96. There was no record of P38 time or flight review since June of '95. Some notes showed that he had 6 to 7 hours of a P38 flight time acquired in the previous 90 days in the green P38 2114 Lima that he flew with during the accident sequence. And he had recorded a video in that airplane showing what it's like to fly the P38. It took about 30 minutes, and it might be out there on YouTube. It appears that the 38 Ethel had flown was registered in the experimental category. 2114 Lima was experimental, and he possessed a letter of authority issued by the FAA noting on his license that he was authorized to act as pilot in command in the following airplanes. That's kind of how it reads. And following airplanes in the experimental category. All makes and models. He used to give it out if you had, 3 or 4 of a particular type. They give you all makes and models instead of listing every one of them. All makes and models of high-performance piston-powered aircraft. The problem here, I think if you heard me a little earlier, is that 7973 was a limited category airplane, and it required a type rating in order to act as PIC. So he needed type rating to fly that particular P-38. And according to the owner, of 14 Lima. The accident pilot had flown his airplane and had practiced simulated single-engine maneuvers with the zero thrust setting, which is 15 inches, 1,500 RPM. But he had not shut one down and feathered the propeller. And it was unclear about had he shot in a single-engine approach or anything like that. Just that he had done that maneuver. These aircraft pilot log entries may seem like small stuff. The failure to have a type rating required to fly the airplane may seem like small stuff. And in some ways it is, but when you combine that with the lack of systems knowledge, specifically the fuel systems, and the poor understanding of single-engine operation and speeds, what I see is cavalier attitudes. And those attitudes cost the pilot his life, destroyed a rare and valuable P38. Fortunately, it didn't hit anybody on the ground when he crashed, and it was pretty much close to in town. A lot of things went wrong on this flight. There are a lot of holes in that Swiss cheese. Most of the rules we fly by are written in blood. In order to close the holes in the cheese, there are hard and fast reasons why behind each rule. Dismissing them as meaningless, frankly, is risky behavior. Dot the I's and cross the T's. It may be a pain, but, frankly, it's not that hard. And this whole flying thing's a journey, so enjoy it as you go along. Don't be in a hurry. The accident pilot painted himself into a corner by not having the attention to paying attention to that complex fuel system and allowing the engine to run out of gas. And then not maintaining his speed above safe single engine speed, and that turned out to be fatal. The airplane will climb on one engine up into the 20s and about 250 miles an hour. So their speed, as long as he had speed, he was good. There's a lot of excess thrust there. Maybe the metaphor of being painted into a corner is the wrong one. Maybe putting yourself between a rock and a hard place is a more accurate one, because of this pilot's risky behavior and cavalier attitude about a very complex airplane. The hard place he flew into was to depart the airplane into a flat spin or do the spin prevent. In other words, I'm too slow, depart it into a flat spin, or do the spin prevent, stop the departure and land the airplane, because he sure couldn't use the working engine anymore at that speed. So he was going to have to run out of, even if he did, he was going to run out of gas shortly, but he didn't have that energy. He lost the speed to be able to use the engine. So he wasn't going to be able to use it anymore. He'd have to land right away. What actually happened was the pilot was along for the ride. And it was not a not so simple mistake that proved disastrous. So now that you've watched this video, go back and watch BSWorks 5, Flat Spins and Twins, and find out what you should do and why. I'll talk about that's the spin prevent maneuver, and that would save your life. Okay, that's what Beach says to do if you have a departure in the Barren. However, if you're too slow to use engine power and too low to use altitude to gain that speed, that's the rock that he was between, the hard place and the rock. He departed the airplane, he was too low, too slow. It was a disaster. Frankly, I'd rather land under control any day of the week. If I'm under control, I've got a better chance of survival. Okay, that's just it. Don't forget, knowledge is power, and the power to survive. It's the power to survive and fly another day. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit like and subscribe. It looks a bit like this here. And I'd also like to thank my Patreon supporters here. If you'd like to support the channel, I'll leave a link below in the description. I'll also leave a link to BSWorks 5 and the P38 video I did. It's eye and ear candy. Fantastic airplane. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.